Hi, Dr. Hellerstein, and welcome to the Truth About Weight Loss Summit. Thanks so much for being here.
It's always fun to be with you.
Dr. Hellerstein, many people lose weight, but why is it so hard for most people to keep it off?
I think that's the most important question in the biology of obesity. It's actually pretty easy to lose weight for a little while. You can go on all kinds of diets and they work. The trick is to keep it off. And the reason it's so difficult is the body is not our friend. The body has programs to defend itself from losing weight. So let me show a few slides, and I'll put this on properly that will hopefully explain why it's so hard to keep weight off. And the role of exercise is going to be the punchline to this for several reasons. So people often say that, just to give you a background, that we're in a state of imbalance if we're overweight or obese. And that's not really right at all. In fact, our body is very good at matching intake to expenditure without really even a clear understanding of why that works. For example, if you just eat, let's say, 3,000 calories a day, that's 1,000,000 calories a year. If on every January 1st you weighed yourself and you gained 5 pounds, you probably wouldn't be happy, most people. But 5 pounds is 2 kilograms. That's like 10,000 calories. That's 1% of 1,000,000. When most things in life, if you're within 1%, you're doing pretty well. So our body, even when we're not perfect, and if someone who's maintaining their exact weight is extremely good at balancing what you eat with how much calories you spend. So how does this happen? We don't think that there's like a thermostat that does this, but there's mechanisms that are a little bit like that. And the best way to understand this, in my experience, is to do a thought experiment. Let's do this. Just pretend you got sick of this whole business, and you just every night you had a little refrigerator in your closet. Nobody looked. You opened the refrigerator and you ate a cup of ice cream. Let's say 500 calories every night. So the hell with it. I like ice cream. Let's say you had, so would you gain 500 calories a day? And you did everything else the same. 3,500 calories a week, that's a pound. Would you gain 50 pounds a year? Would you gain 500 pounds in 10 years? Of course not. Yet there are obviously people who are eating 500 extra calories a day. So what prevents us from gaining 500 pounds in 10 years? What if you did the opposite? Would you lose a pound a week? Would you lose 50 pounds a year? Of course not. You wouldn't even be alive if you lost 50 pounds a year after a year or two. So what prevents it? And there have been studies to just do this exact thought experiment. My favorite one is from Rockefeller University. And what they showed, and I'll show 2 data slides in this whole thing, real data slides, because I think they're worth it knowing. And this data slide shows that if you gain weight, your energy expenditure, the amount of calories you burn goes up. And if you lose weight, the amount of calories you burn goes down. The body just does that. This is a famous study 25 years ago. Here's what they did. They took either obese people or non-obese people, and they overfed them or underfed them. And I'll keep it simple. An obese person weighed 130 kilograms on average, which is like 270 pounds, or a lean person 150 pounds. And if they fed them until they overfed them under on a metabolic ward, which means they never left the place for 6 months. So they knew what they ate, they knew what they did. And if they gained 12 kilograms or 25 pounds, most of it was fat. Some of it was lean tissue, and they spent 870 extra calories a day just to walk around. If you're lean, you gain 10%, which is 15 pounds or so, and you spend 630 extra calories a day just to walk around and be alive. Which means that if you're a lean person and you want to eat 600 calories more a day, all you have to do is gain 15 pounds. But that's the price you'll pay. You can either exercise or do something else that burns off 600 calories, or you can gain 15 pounds, most of which is fat. In the reverse direction, so that's like kind of a joke of a trade. Here, gain 15 pounds or exercise. But that's what people do in actual life to allow themselves to eat. But what would happen is the other point, if after they gain 15 pounds, they would spend 600 calories more or 900 calories or more, and they'd stop gaining weight. Now you can eat more and not gain weight. Well, the exact flip side happens when you lose weight. So if you start off and you lose 10%, most of it is fat, but some of it is lean tissue. And now, if you start off spending about 3,000, you spend 550 fewer calories every day just to be alive. So let's say you used to eat 3,100 calories, now you eat 2,500. And you say, hey, I'm doing great. I mean, I'm not eating. I'm eating 2,500 calories. You won't lose any more weight. You're done. You're back at a new balance. Your body has economized, and so you're not in negative balance. Same thing with a non-obese person. If for some reason they try to lose weight, they'll lose, 15 pounds, and now they spend 400 calories fewer, and they'll stop losing weight. This, to me, is one of the most important physiology experiments of the last 50 years, and I teach it to students all the time, which is to say that energy expenditure is not constant. It adapts to your weight. And one of the reasons for that, but not the only reason, is that you do lose or gain muscle, fat-free mass. So this is there's many, many figures like this, but this is a figure showing that your fat-free mass, which is mostly muscle, correlates very well with your resting energy expenditure in thousands and thousands of people. The more muscle you have, the more expensive it is, which in our world is good. We want to burn calories. The more expensive it is to live, to have more muscle. And this is how many calories per kilogram is about the same no matter how big you are in terms of fat-free mass. So this, what I call this dynamic energy balance equation, that energy expenditure changes as you change. It's sort of like if you made more money, suddenly you'd spend more. Or if you made less money, you'd spend less. That would be like, if you were really that smart in life, you would do that perhaps. But our body does that. So this tells who's going to gain weight. For example, there's studies that if there are two siblings, one of whom spends 2,500 calories at rest, one who spends 2,100, the one who spends 2,100 will gain weight until they equal their sibling. Isn't that amazing? It sort of predicts who's going to gain weight. It also says, as we started this conversation, why most diets fail. It's easy to lose weight, but then your body fights you. And how frustrating is it? And many, many people in the audience will experience, will feel this, will know this. How frustrating is it to eat the same and adhere to the same diet and stop losing weight? So then what do you have to do? Eat even less, and then you'll get to a new balance. Of course, this becomes impossible. You're starving, you're not right, and you're not even losing weight. And by the way, this explains why a lot of people do bad habits. For example, women have not stopped smoking in the same way that men have in the last 50 years. Men have smoked half as much, and there's half as much lung cancer, exactly the same ratio. Women have not smoked half as much. One of the reasons is that nicotine increases adrenaline in the blood a little bit, and people who smoke maybe weigh 2 or 3 kilograms less than if they don't smoke. So for 5 pounds, it's an easy way to lose 5 pounds or to keep 5 pounds off. Of course, 20% of smokers die from smoking. It's a bad trade health-wise, but it's a heck of it's easier than exercise because it burns about 100 calories a day. Okay, so then what does work for long-term weight loss? I think that's the question. And the truth is we're very bad at it. I think probably 5% of people who go on a diet lose 30 pounds for 5 years, which is the definition of success, of a truly successful weight loss, 30 pounds, 5 years. So the two main factors that have been reported, and I don't think these are the only things, but this is a nice summary. For people who successfully lose weight, 30 pounds, 5 years, is one, the most important, is that they voluntarily do activities, exercise, of about 400 calories a day, 400 or 500 calories a day. That's not being a marathon runner. You can walk to the train station and back. A lot of people, they live in the city, or you can take an hour and 15-minute walk after work. That's 400 or 500 calories a day if you did it. And that allows you, if you think about it, to eat 500 calories more, not feel deprived. And we'll see, it also increases your muscle mass, which is good too. And thereby not be dominated by your body's reduction of calorie expenditure. The other thing that correlates is people tend to have a less energy dense diet. Now, what's energy dense? Sugar and fat. So, I mean, I think that makes sense, but it's hard by itself that often doesn't work without the exercise. So the way I phrase it, I like to keep this simple and dramatic. Our body fat stores remember being fat, remember being full, and they're harsh masters with a long memory. We are programmed to defend our body weight by reducing our calorie burn. We also increase our appetite, but everybody's aware of that. That's why we try to pick foods that, carefully, that don't keep us hungry. But even if we do that, we're going to burn fewer calories. Our bodies are working against us. They're designed to prevent starvation, not to prevent obesity. It's clear that's the case. And this can be defended for years. So this is not helpful to many people alive now, but I think in the big picture, if you never become overweight and your body fat never expands, it's probably easier. Or maybe not never, but maybe it takes a few years for your fat cells to get used to it, something like that. But prevention would, as in most diseases, be actually more effective than reversal. Okay, so I think we can stop and talk about some other things if you like.
Well, it sounds to me like when we lose weight, our body works against us.
Completely, and it makes sense. Think about it. In nature, do you think the biggest problem was overfeeding? In historic, I mean, do you think animals out there, that's their problem? They have too much food?
Quite the opposite historically.
Quite the opposite. And indeed, so our bodies are brilliant at not starving. Brilliant. I teach classes on the genius of our starvation response. We drop our thyroid hormone, we drop leptin, we drop insulin needs, we reduce growth hormone so we don't grow. Women stop having periods so they don't have babies if they're starving. Everything is designed. Girls have their first menstrual periods when they have enough body fat to support reproduction. That's actually the way. Leptin is a hormone that comes from the adipose tissue, and it goes up when a girl hits a certain body fatness at age 10, 11, 12, 13, whatever. In the old days, in Romeo and Juliet's time, they would be 14 years old before they got fat enough and had their periods. Now it's much younger. Yeah. So fatness is really sensed by our bodies.
Do you think that the reason the age of menarche has gotten younger is because people are just getting fatter?
I think that's pretty clear. Yeah, it correlates with body mass, which is generally in young people about fatness. Yeah. Wow. So menarche is starting at now about 11, and it used to be, I mean, really, I love this Romeo and Juliet story because she was 13 or 14 in that story, and she was a rich girl, so she was wealthy, so she might have had her periods, but peasant girls were having their periods at 16, and then they'd meet Romeo, and if they didn't kill themselves in the play, they would have their babies right away, and they'd never have a period without, they'd have periods late and babies early.
Wow. You said a fat cell is a harsh master with a long memory. Is that to protect us? I mean, from an evolutionary perspective, do you think that's?
I don't love that idea but I think it's true. I think you probably had fat cells just to protect yourself against harsh winters. And, if you think about it, there'd be evolutionary roadblocks or narrowings where a lot of people way back would have died during some harsh drought or winter, and the people whose fat cells could keep them alive would make it. And so we got good at that.
So the more muscle mass you have, the more calories you burn?
Okay, that's another really important point. And this brings me into the whole emphasis on exercise, because I know there's a lot of kind of arithmetic that people use against exercise, and they're, I think, exactly wrong. It's all really got it upside down. So there's three good reasons to exercise when it comes to, especially in the context of weight loss. The first reason is what I just said, is that if you just burn 500 calories a day, you can eat those 500 calories, and that's more food in your body. So you can be sitting at the table and everyone else is eating a cookie after dinner, or putting sugar in their coffee or whatever, and you can't do it, and suddenly you just get sick of that, and maybe you're hungry. Whereas if you're exercising, you can have the same calorie intake that you had before you lost weight. Now, so a lot of people say, well, I have to exercise, 100, I have to run a mile or walk a mile and a half to eat 2 apples. just not the way to think about it. Is that if you do exercise 400 or 500 calories, you can eat you can eat whatever you spent your life eating. You don't have to deprive yourself from a kind of textural or sensual feeling of food. Just eat what you always ate. But now you're burning 400 calories and your body drops 7 kilograms, which is not trivial. It's 15 pounds, 20 pounds. I mean, and that's just, or even more, 25 pounds if you started off overweight. So that's the first reason. It's just a arithmetic reason. The second reason is it gives you muscle. Muscle is through activity. Now, men have more muscle than women from testosterone or androgens, but the main factors for muscle are dietary protein, androgens, and activity. So if someone walks 5 miles a day, they will have more lean body mass, more muscle mass. And even if they don't lose weight, this is the key point. If they have a difference in muscle versus fat, they are a different person, a completely different person. In terms of risk factors for diabetes, heart disease, all that, the fatty liver, Alzheimer's disease, cancer, they're completely different. They're not as insulin resistant and so on. But that's not the only reason. They also are, they burn more calories. If you put on, and there's, formula, X kilograms of muscle, you burn X times a certain factor, numbers of kilocalories every day. So people who exercise, not only they burn the calories from exercise, but their muscle burns calories just sleeping at night, just walking around. It costs to have muscle. You're like I showed that figure, your lean body mass or your muscle mass is very correlated in everybody with how many calories you burn at rest. You can look at some people and say, hey, they weigh 150 pounds, but if one person is fatter, one person is lean and muscular, that person who is lean will burn way more calories. People say, oh, they have a high metabolism. It's not like it's necessarily some genetic thing. They just have more muscle, relatively speaking. So that's the second reason. Muscle burns calories. There was a book called Strong Women Stay Lean. And I kind of like that title. I like that idea that strong lets you eat and keeps it in muscle, not in fat. But then the third reason, and this is a little less well understood, is that there's this whole thing about fitness versus fatness. So if you'd like, I can go into that a little bit.
Yeah, I would love to. This is fascinating because so many people just don't exercise.
Exactly. I think they get a lot of bad information about that. Because if you look at, before I talk about fitness, fatness, if you look at what's different now than, 50 years ago, people are way, way fatter than they were 70 years ago. I saw a picture of John Kennedy in West Virginia talking, in the election of 1960. He's campaigning, and you look out, and there's thousands of people standing out listening to him. They're all wearing suits, and they're all skinny. Go to West Virginia now. Not so. It is not so. And so what is different? Well, there's diet and there's activity. And it's easier to talk about diet, but I think it's at least as important. I would say more important, but I don't want to minimize diet than the exercise part. And here's the other reason that this matters in terms of health, not just in terms of how you look, is that fitness may be more important than how much body fat you have. So let's talk about that for a minute. First of all, what is fitness? Fitness, often people say, hey, you look fit. What they're really saying is you don't look overweight. That's not what fit means. Fit means it's your ability to do aerobic work, to exercise. Metabolic fitness is capacity of your tissues, particularly your muscle, your heart, your lung, all that, to do work, to walk, run, lift, carry, do things that take vigorous long-term that demand work over time. So then you say, well, you can't be fat and fit, right? Well, you can. There's some great examples of that. Anybody, if there are basketball fans out there, there was Charles Barkley, who's famous now as an announcer. When he was very young, he was very big and fat early in his career, and he was incredibly fit. He could run like crazy. So he was an unusual person. He was overweight and he was fit. But there's a whole group of people who are sumo wrestlers in Japan mostly. also Hawaii and places like that, where these are people who are like American football players. They have to hit each other, knock them back. So mass times acceleration means that you need to be bigger. So these guys weigh 400 pounds. They're huge, but they also are very disciplined. They work out 8 hours a day. They eat a very special diet. They are extremely fit. And if you measure them, they have high HDLs, low insulins. They're not diabetic. Their glucose is good, and they have low visceral fat, which is something I won't get into. But they don't have fat in there around their intestine. They have it subcutaneous. And so these are fit, fat people. And then these sumo wrestlers, when they get old, they get to be 40 and they retire. They think they can eat the same way, and suddenly they're diabetic, getting heart disease because they're no longer exercising. I mean, I think that's one of the best examples. Same body, same person, stops exercising, still weighs 400 pounds, and now he's at risk like any 400 pounder. In fact, American football players, you look at a lot of these guys, especially these big linemen, they get to be 45, 50 years old, and they're dying of strokes and heart attacks. It's incredible. They were playing football, 7, 8 years ago. But there's not many people who are fat and fit. There are some, but not that many. You can do it. It's just a little unusual. Now, are there people who are thin but unfit? You've probably heard of that idea too, right? I've heard people call it skinny fat people or something like that. I don't think that's the right way to think about it. I think it's thin, unfit people. There's some people who just lie around all day. They don't eat, evidently, and they don't exercise. They have very atrophied muscle. They may even be fat. They may have 30% body fat, but they don't weigh a lot. So they look thin. I'll show you that there are people like this, and they are not metabolically healthy. So here's why we should care about fitness, is that in big studies, it correlates better with health and death rates than how fat you are. And I'll show you, this is my favorite slide on this. I could show you many papers on this, but this is a striking one. This is about, I don't know, 5 or 10,000 men studied in Texas and Dallas. And they measured their fitness, which is hard to do. You have to get people on a treadmill. I mean, it's not a routine test that doctors do. And then they measured their body fatness. And so they group people into fitness categories and fat categories. So they either called them unfit, which was they call them unfit, which is these open bars, or no, sorry, the unfit is this dark bar, or fit, which is the open bar. And then they had, this is the risk of dying, and then in the bottom part of the graph is the risk of dying from heart attack. These are bad things. We can all agree that dying from a heart attack is not something you want. So that outcome is, I think, pretty clear. So then they have lean, normal, and obese, which is the middle, the third. And then they have unfit versus fit. So here's what's amazing. This group here is the unfit, obese people. Sorry, this group here with the number 40 above it is the unfit, lean people. They have a relative risk of 2 times above the baseline. This group here with 75 above it is the fit, obese people. They have a much lower disease risk of dying than the unfit, skinny people. Same thing with dying from a heart attack. The unfit, thin people have a higher death rate than the fit, obese people. Now you can see if you saw the whole paper, there's far fewer fit, obese people and far more fit, lean people. But if you happen to be in those odd categories, it shows what the real thing is. So unfit, obese people have a very high rate. But the key point here is, if you maintain fitness, it can mitigate a lot of other bad things. And fitness is about activity. It's all about exercise. It's about, aerobic walking, working in the garden. There are studies that just working in the garden 3 times a week for a half hour. Studies from Korea, from Scandinavia, from California, from other parts of the United States, working in the garden 3 or 4 times a week reduces the diabetes rate by 50 to 60%, just by maintaining a little bit of fitness, because many people don't do much at all.
I would say most people don't do much at all these days.
I think that might not be wrong. I think that even kids, don't walk to school because they're afraid of, their parents are afraid of what could happen. They don't play at school. They don't have recess. They come home. They sit on their social media. They do their computer. They watch TV. They go to sleep.
When
Yeah.
I was in high school, actually, no, when I was in junior high, they got rid of physical education in school.
Yeah, in California, they barely do it at all. And people don't walk to school. We used to, of course, just walk back and forth to school, play on the playground. You don't see that. So anyway, to get back to, I can summarize on this. Why is exercise key? And I think maintaining weight loss and in maintaining health, if you're concerned about being overweight. First of all, it does replace the lost calories that you would used to burn, but you no longer burn because you lost weight, because your body is mad at you for losing weight. And it's reducing its, make you hungry and reducing how many calories you burn. The body is defending its own health, it thinks, but you don't agree. So food intake does not need to keep dropping if you maintain activity. It doesn't have to be running or swimming. It can just be anything that burns calories. I think walking is very good. It's not boring. If you go with a friend, if you go someplace nice, if you go outside, it's not boring at all. It's relaxing. You have a dog, get a dog just to walk. I always walk with my dog. So walking replaces lost calories. It maintains your muscle mass, which burns more calories. Even when you're not exercising, your muscle is doing the work for you. And finally, and maybe most importantly, although maybe not the way you look, it maintains your fitness. Fitness is all about activity. And there's a little genetics, but not so much for fitness. Mostly it's about activity. And that correlates big time with health outcomes, even when you're overweight. So if you exercise, change your muscle mass and change your fitness, even if you don't lose weight, your doctor should give you a gold star because you've done great for your health.
That's
yeah. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say that this is really interesting because I think about some kids I know, friends, children, and they're not overweight, but they literally have never exercised at all their whole life. This is their only form of exercise.
It's amazing. Actually, we have run for decades, or had run for decades, the San Francisco General Hospital Diabetes Clinic, which means if you don't have insurance, private insurance in the county of San Francisco, and you have diabetes, I know you. And it has changed over the years. We have a very multi-ethnic clinic, 25% Caucasian, 25% African American, 25% Latino, and 25% or so Asian American. And there's different body demographics of body composition. And there's some demographics where people are not overweight, but they're sedentary and fat. They don't weigh more, but they have very little muscle, and they actually are technically obese. They have 30%, 35% body fat, and they get diabetes. 25-year-old. We see that, and we never used to see that because they're so sedentary now.
Is there a percent body fat that we should be aiming for?
Yeah, that's a nice question. I think it's different for women than for men. I think 20% is usually thought to be okay. That's normal, maybe. I think very fit males are 10 or 15%. I think that's asking a lot. I think more than about 30 or 40% is 30% certainly is starting to be obese. If I wouldn't measure body weight personally. If to do this rationally, I measure muscle and fat. I'll talk about that in a little bit, but I think muscle and fat are the key. It's the ratio of muscle to fat, so to speak, something like that really determines the risk for diabetes and all the insulin-related complications, which are many, which include cancer, Alzheimer's disease, fatty liver disease, all kinds of things.
How do we assess that ratio of muscle to fat? Is this a test we can get at the doctor's office, or how do we figure out what our percentages are? Really
good question. You can calculate how much fat you have by a bioelectrical test. You ever seen those? You stand on a little scale, or they put an electrode on your arm. That's pretty accurate. It doesn't tell you how much muscle you have accurately, though, because it tells you all the body water, which need not be in muscle. It could be an intestine. It could be edema. It could be anything else. There's a lot. So that's not it. But so actually, my laboratory just developed a test of muscle. We've done it in thousands of people. It's a very easy test. So I think a test like ours is going to be should be very commonly used. But right now you can test how much lean tissue and how much fat you have quite easily by doing a bioelectrical impedance or a toe back or any of those. A lot of dietitians' offices, they have that pretty routinely. Some doctors do, not most, but some do. And that's accurate for percent fat. The percent muscle, like I said, we have a new test, and maybe I'll show you a little bit of that. But I don't want to make this about myself. But I think we need a muscle test it's like measuring cholesterol or glucose. I think in the obesity world, the body composition world, there's two main things. Muscle is 40% of your body weight, 35 to 40, depending. In lean people, fat is 15 or 20, and if you get obese, it's 40 or 50. There's not much percent left after that, is there? I mean, those are the two main compartments of your body.
It's interesting what you said about food intake does not have to keep dropping if you maintain activity. One of the speakers on this summit is Dr. Barbara Rolls, who does a lot of research in the field of calorie density at Penn State. And I think that if people don't get enough food, eventually they're going to feel hungry and go off their diet.
Well, I think that's a key point. And I often feel this, how hard it is to lose weight just by reducing calories. Everybody has stresses in their life. I mean, there are times when there's a family tragedy, when things aren't going well at work, or when, your car breaks down, your kids are having trouble, whatever, you're having problems with your spouse. There's lots of stress in this world. And to be hungry on top of that is often too much, and people just say the heck with it, and they, get off their diet. Whereas exercise, often when they're stressed, sometimes it's even makes you run better, exercise more. So, and because it's de-stressing in a similar way. So I totally agree with that. I think fighting your hunger is difficult for a whole lifetime.
Are you familiar with the show The Biggest Loser? Because that really did emphasize exercise, yet most of the people on that show still gained their weight back.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't watch that. I didn't watch that show. Well, most diets it's hard. I think the body is a harsh master. I think we're not good at it. But I think people who do lose weight, not saying it's easy, they do tend to exercise.
But how do we get people to start? Because honestly, there'll be people watching this summit that have literally lived their whole lives sedentary.
I think walking is the best way. Anybody can walk, unless you have really bad arthritis. Or you're very, very overweight. If you're very, very overweight so that you can't walk, I think you're in trouble. I really have to say that. I think people who can still walk, I've watched people walk a lot, and I've watched people walk or run slowly, and I watched this guy in front of my house when I was in Boston. He went from probably 320 pounds to about 140 pounds over 5 years. He'd come by every day. He'd be walking or very slow jogging. And if you have a long time frame, and you're not impatient, and you monitor it. You can measure your fatness or your weight, or even your muscle. It's very positive feedback, and you will continue to lose weight if you do it.
For people that have trouble walking, do you think something like walking in a pool or something just to get started could be beneficial?
Swimming is great if you have access to swimming. Swimming is fantastic, and swimming is great aerobic. I had a patient in my diabetes clinic who needed 200 units, 300 units of insulin a day. We got so tired of it that we figured out a way for her to get to a swimming pool in the middle of San Francisco. She swam 3 times a week for 20 minutes. This was not Mark Spitz swimming, This was just paddling around a bit. And her insulin requirements fell to 50 a day just by that kind of exercise. So exercise and swimming is great.
So the thing is people just need to start doing something. They need to do
something. And it can't. And some people sit on an exercise bike and don't have resistance. It doesn't do it. Honestly, exercise bikes, unless you're a real athlete, don't do much because you don't carry your weight. Now, if you can carry your weight around, then it kind of works for you. It means you are, and treat it like exercise. Walk for an hour and a half. It's a long time, but you can do it. Everybody can do it.
and then take a shower, fresh, and you'll feel great.
What about a spin bike though? That's a little bit different than a recumbent bike?
Well, I think an athlete on a spin bike who's really sweating is one thing. I think I see a lot of people on spin bikes with very low resistance, and I don't think they're burning calories.
But if you're like maybe standing at a higher level?
Oh yeah, that's great. That's fabulous.
Can you, by how much you sweat a determinant of how hard you worked?
Not a bad one. It depends. It's one way.
Yeah. One of the things you have talked about before in some of the talks I've heard you give is about carbohydrates and fat. And I'm wondering if you could touch on that, because there's such a debate about that in the world in general, but especially people wanting to lose weight. They often go on a keto diet, which many of the experts on the summit believe actually mortgages their health in the long term from short-term results. But when people go on these low-carb diets, are they really losing body fat?
I've done studies on keto diets and on high carb diets, either low carb or high carb diet. I don't think that's the key determinant. Some people, it works different ways. Some people really like carbs. Some people find carbs totally non-satiating. Some people say that if they eat pasta, it doesn't matter. They could just keep eating it. They're still hungry. Other people like me, if I don't eat bread and pasta, I'll be hungry no matter how much else I eat. So I think there's individual differences, but I don't think that's the key. So personally, I'm a little bit agnostic about how you eat fewer calories. I think it's how many calories you can convince your body to eat and not feel hungry with. That's the trick. So and people I know who are, say, athletic, they tend to eat high fiber, carb and protein heavy foods. And it fills them up, and they're not hungry, but they're not eating that many calories. But I think to get to your question about carbs, here's the confused part. The part is a little bit confusing. We've done a lot of studies and show that if you eat carbs, they mostly are not converted into fat. That's the process called de novo or new lipogenesis. Very little of that in the human body. Other animals do a lot of new fat synthesis. You overfeed a cow, they make fat. And pigs, that's how they feed them grain and slop, which is carbs. A honeybee makes wax, that's oil, that's fat. And what did they eat? They eat pollen or that kind of the stuff that is converted into honey. So there's a lot of animals that can make fat from carbs, but we don't. Very seldom do we. So some people have misinterpreted, and we published a lot on that. And some people have misinterpreted that to say that you cannot get fat from carbs. That's totally wrong, because what happens when you eat carbs, although the carbs themselves don't become fat molecules, the carbs replace fat in your fuel mixture. It's as though you had two bank accounts. If you put money into one account, you spend from that, and the other account will grow. So if you spend from because carbs win, there's a hierarchy of fuel selection in the body. Carbs replace fat if you have both. So you'll eat extra carbs, you won't burn fat, and your fat will go to your fat stores. A lot of people make the joke, if I eat this ice cream, it'll go right to my hips. It's kind of right if they're eating sugar and fat with that. The fat won't get consumed. So eating carbs is not free. It's a big mistake.
But isn't sugar and fat a particularly deadly combination?
Yeah, I think sugar and fat is terrible. I think I think fried foods are the worst because they're so dense for calories. And I think sugar and fat foods are right behind them because they taste so good and they're so non-satiating. You can eat a lot of chocolate and a lot of ice cream and cheesecake. Very yummy stuff. So and hard to stop. So that combination is the most calorically dense and satiating at the same time. And not satiating at the same time. But eating carbs and fat will make you fat or help you store fat, because the carbs will keep you from burning the fat, the sugar. And sugar is particularly bad. We just did a study published yesterday, actually, in a very good journal of Clinical Investigation. we took adolescent boys in Atlanta with fatty liver disease. This is a big new problem. Liver disease in kids. Very common now that kids are getting overweight and insulin resistant. And we, in the study, they removed all sugar from their diet for like 8 weeks or something. They did this by taking all the sugar out of the house, and the whole family had to eat a sugar-free diet for 8 weeks. And two things happened. Their liver fat fell by a third, and their new fat synthesis fell by a third. So although new fat synthesis doesn't make you fat as a person, usually, it can lead to fat depositing in your liver, particularly fructose and simple sugars. So I think sugars are actually, I like sugar personally, but I think it's bad for you for most people.
But Dr. Hellerstein, isn't there a difference? All carbs are not created equal. So isn't there a difference between ingesting things like fruits, beans, whole grains, potatoes versus sugar, flour, and alcohol?
Oh, completely. Well, alcohol is a different thing, but sugar and simple sugars, especially liquid simple sugars, and especially fructose, which is present in sucrose, but with table sugar, and in high fructose corn syrup, which is kind of everywhere in fast foods. Those sugars get right into your body. They don't satiate very much. You can drink a liter of Coke, and there's a ton of calories in that. A liter of Sprite or whatever, and they have adverse effects like insulin resistance, fatty liver. They're just really. There's no doubt that sugar has adverse metabolic effects compared to complex carbs. So it's really totally dependent. Carbs, I think carbs are a tremendous food. Complex carbs, natural carbs. Fruits you can't eat 10 apples, but you can drink a liter of Coke. It's hard. Fruits are not dense fructose. Fruits are not the problem with fructose and sugar.
Right. Well, you said alcohol was different. Is that a problematic food for people wanting to be healthy and lose weight?
Alcohol is a source of calories. People who drink a lot will burn those calories. In fact, alcohol, if there's a hierarchy of foods, I said carbs come above fat. Alcohol comes above everybody. If you eat alcohol, you won't burn anything else until the alcohol is gone. That'll be your first fuel. And so that'll keep you from burning carbs and fat. And so then the carbs, the hierarchy goes, you'll gain fat from eating alcohol, drinking alcohol.
Wow. That's really interesting. I would think, though, if exercise is that important, wouldn't a higher complex carbohydrate diet be better to fuel workouts?
Okay, that's a nice question. I think that's right. I think people who work out tend to eat. In the old days, people would eat a steak meal before a game, and that was totally wrong. What you really want is glycogen and carbs in your system, especially to do aerobic exercise, which is many sports. Any sport that involves running for extended periods of time is aerobic. So, or swimming, or biking, or hiking and climbing. Those are very aerobic. So complex carbs are very good for that. But if you're doing that much exercise, it's probably unlikely that you are metabolically unfit or overweight, actually. So it's a different thing. I think there's athletes and there's people who aren't, and there's a big difference in how they, and there's people in the middle too. But activity changes everything. Our bodies, long ago, our bodies there's some data that people ran more than 10 miles a day, early hunter-gatherers. And our bodies were really designed and very efficient at long, slow exercise.
How much exercise a day do you recommend people get, whether they're wanting to lose weight or overweight or not, just to be healthy?
Yeah, for fitness. Think about it as fitness. If we had a test for fitness, we would be in great shape. If we had a test for muscle mass, which I think we do now, we would be in great shape. If we had a test for how many calories you burn a day, a simple test, everybody should have that. We don't have those tests. We have difficult tests right now for that, except for this muscle mass test that I just talked about. But so the goal of exercise is not just, it's fitness. That's the real goal. But it also is burning calories and increasing muscle mass. That, to me, you really want to be technical. If you were a robot, what did you want to do from exercise? If you had the calculation capacity of a robot. That's what you would do. You exercise in order to become more fit, have more muscle, and burn more calories. So fitness is well understood. If you exercise 30 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes, at a pulse of a certain fraction of your maximal pulse, and I don't want to get too technical. If you exercise so that your pulse is up, if you're doing it continuously for 20 to 30 minutes, and you do that every other day, 3 or 4 times a week, your fitness will improve. You don't have to exercise every day. You don't have to exercise an hour and a half a day, and you don't have to exercise to exhaustion. You should exercise 20 to 30 minutes at an elevated pulse, continuously, not taking too many breaks. If you take a lot of breaks, it's not as good. You want to keep your pulse up and do that 3 or 4 times a week.
And that's advice for everyone.
I think everybody should do that. That's a very modest thing in terms of evolutionary human beings. Most people in the history of mankind did a lot more than that.
Yeah. What about this idea of doing like 10 minutes and then 10 minutes and then 10 minutes? Is that not a good idea? It's better just to kind of do it all at the same time.
I have not seen great studies on that. I know that there's studies where I have people who work as, let's say, night watchmen, and they'll walk, for 10 minutes, and they'll sit for 2 hours and walk for 10 minutes, and that is not exercise. That's not as good as walking for an hour. That's clear, because they come into my diabetes clinic. They're not doing well. But intermittent exercise might be okay. I'm not so sure about that.
So anytime you create a calorie deficit, you're going to lose weight. But could you lose weight on a very high fat diet as long as you're in a caloric deficit? It seemed that
absolutely. That's what the whole Atkins and certain those diets are about. That they say that you will get into a new state like a ketogenic diet. And then there's been a lot of beliefs that some of these are kind of magical. If you get in it, if you ingest fat, which is very unnatural, your body then switches to what's called ketogenic. It doesn't even use carbs barely. Even the brain, which normally uses sugar, glucose, carbs, learns how to not do that. And some people say that they don't get hungry. I don't buy it personally. I think maybe for a while they don't buy it and they get hungry. But I helped put together a study. We really tested a ketogenic diet. Very well done study by first author is Kevin Hall, published recently. And it was okay. It wasn't magic. People lost, a tiny bit more than they lost on a non-ketogenic diet, not much. It was not some miracle. And it's hard. A ketogenic diet has some nice things about it. For example, children with epilepsy, for unknown reasons, do way better on a ketogenic diet. It's incredible, but that's different than the average person. So I think the ketogenic diet, it needs a lot of study, but I don't think it's a miracle.
But were these people satisfied with their food plan, and were they able to keep it off? And were they healthy, like from a cardiovascular standpoint?
Yeah, that's a good question. And a lot of people, I don't think they're that unhealthy from a cardiovascular standpoint. If they're losing weight on a ketogenic diet, if you're on a high-fat diet and gaining weight, it's a totally different ballgame. If you're on a high-fat diet and you can lose weight, it's probably like losing weight for most other things. I don't think the lipids are worse. But if you don't lose weight, so if you're on a high-fat diet and you don't lose weight, it's probably worse than being on a standard fat or low-fat diet and not losing weight. So that's the trouble to me with that whole line of approach. It maybe is okay while you're losing weight, your body's in a negative balance. I do think the key is what you're I think you're indirectly or implying is, I think, the key thing. You need to get on a diet that you can maintain. This is why I talk about maintaining weight loss. I mean, in the old days, there were things like grapefruit diets or banana. That's crazy. Who can stand grapefruits the rest of their life? That's just silly. So I'm a great believer that when if I want to change my diet, I make sure that it's something I think I could stick with. And then if I can modulate it so that it's, the right number of calories, fine. If I can't do it, then that's not the right diet, because this is not going to go away. If you do this for 3 months and get sick of it, you're going to be back where you were, because your body will drive back to your old weight. This is a long-term plan.
Because from what I understand, from you, our bodies are always working against us when we lose weight.
I think so. And I don't understand when that stops. I think this is a great gap in modern knowledge is that, okay, so let's say you go overweight for 5 years and then you lose weight. So now it's 5 years. Now it's 10 years. Now it's, are you still remembering your old weight? There's some data that you are. I just don't understand that. It's like your fat cells remember for decades, but I don't know if we really know that. I think this is the next part of the next generation of research to understand when and how we can overcome our body's memory of being overweight.
So fat cells are like a woman scorned. They have a very long memory.
Fat cells are like T cells in your body. After a germ, you get infected. Your T cells remember for 50 years. They have a very long memory. Yes, both do.
Right. Well, how do we because not everybody wants to eat a high fat diet, but a lot of people would like to be able to eat more carbs, more complex carbohydrates, fruit, whole grains, legumes, sweet potatoes. But a lot of people are afraid to eat carbs, thinking that is what makes people fat.
I think that's a modern myth, and it kind of drives me crazy. I mean, I hear people on TV saying, "Oh, he's got to eat a little bit more carbs because he's got to gain some weight," or something about a football player. It's not how it goes. Carbs are not the problem. Actually, generally speaking, if you look at countries, which is not a most accurate way, if you look at the countries that eat higher fat, they are fatter. Now, there's other confounding factors too, but if you look at Northern Europe versus Southern Europe, they're fatter in Northern Europe, and they eat more fat, more animal fat. Look at America, the states that have the highest fat and have the highest rates of obesity. But there's other confounding factors too, so I don't want to overdo that. In general, the amount of fat people eat has not correlated that well with how fat they are outside of these big, clusters. So I think you can do either, but it's surely not the case that high carb diets statistically are more associated with obesity. Completely backwards. Now, people might think carbs is like going and eating Twinkies or eating a bun at McDonald's, which are full of sugar and are white bread and don't fill you up at all. You ate complex carbs, whole grains, rice with a hull on it, brown rice, wheat, grains. Those fill you up quite nicely, and they're not that calorically dense, and they can taste great. You can put all kinds of stuff. Pastas can be delicious, and without being that many calories. Now you can make them high calories by putting sweet and fat stuff on them.
Right, exactly. Well, a lot of people that I've talked to are diabetic or pre-diabetic and say, but when they eat carbs, even the complex carbs, their blood sugar goes up. So that's why they're afraid
That's not, interesting. I've run a diabetes clinic for decades, and that's even the statistics on that are not even correct. Generally speaking, people can eat carbs and do just fine with diabetes. It's simple sugars that most people should avoid. Drinking soda is really problematic for matching your insulin if you're on it. But carbs actually are not a problem. You can eat, there are all kinds of studies that higher complex carb diets tend to stabilize glucose. It doesn't bounce around as much. And so I think that's a little mistake. You may have to take more insulin, long-acting insulin, but maybe not. So I think that's not correct as a diabetologist.
Are you familiar with the work of Dr. Walter Kempner?
Tell me more.
Where he fed his patients a diet of white rice, fruit juice, sugar, and fruit, and reversed all their diabetes.
No, I'm not familiar with that.
Okay.
They probably was a very low calorie. There's a lot of weight loss involved.
I believe so.
Yeah. So if you lose weight, it's like I said, if you lose weight, your body goes into this adaptation. One of the things about weight loss is your insulin needs go down. This is part of the whole starvation response. Your energy expenditure goes down, but while you're losing weight, your insulin sensitivity is much better. We did studies where we put people for 5 days on very low carbohydrate diets, depleted their liver glycogen, and these are type 2 diabetics. Their blood sugar fell dramatically, and the liver's production of glucose, which is what fuels fasting high blood sugar, fell dramatically in 5 days. Even before, they were 300-pound people when they lost 2 pounds. So it wasn't the weight in that case. It was the glucose insulin sensitivity. So that's a very separate thing than just the average person who wants to maintain a healthy weight the rest of their life.
Can you get insulin sensitivity improved by a high carb diet, sort of like the one that
Absolutely.
Bobby?
Absolutely. It's all about, again, the main things for instance, sensitivity are weight, or particularly losing weight if you're overweight, and fitness. So fit people who exercise are far more insulin sensitive than people who don't exercise. And the studies of exercise in type 2 diabetes are not as impressive because by the time you have type 2 diabetes, it's rather too late for exercise to help. But to prevent diabetes, exercise is by far the most effective thing. Even modest exercise, as I said, working in the garden, walking 30 minutes 3 times a week can reduce diabetes in pre-diabetics by 60%. So
Wow.
it's early is when you really want to do this stuff.
I heard you once say that the best time to treat diabetes is before you have diabetes.
Oh, I say this all the time as a joke. In my diabetes clinic, I would say, I'll only be happy when clinics like this are put out of business. Because, again, not to be too dramatic, and I have some slides about this, but I don't need to show those. Diseases get stronger as they age, while we get weaker. The more advanced the disease is, the worse it is. It's true for cancer, diabetes, Alzheimer's disease. Early is better. The time to treat a disease is before it's a disease. That's when our diseases get into cycles where they get worse and worse with time. So it's easier to prevent diabetes than to treat it if you start early.
Probably the same with cancer and heart disease and obesity.
It's totally true. And obesity, I don't know about. I think it's true. I think if we could prevent obesity, we'd be better off than trying to reverse it. But it's certainly true for cancer. My favorite story about cancer is cervical cancer, where if you have cervical cancer, the clinical cervical cancer, the outlook is terrible. It's no better than it was 70 years ago. And yet we've reduced the incidence of cervical cancer by 80 to 90%, totally through the pap smear, which detects precancer. No woman should ever get cervical cancer. They just need to get pap smears because that detects early or precancer, and you can do something about it. The same is true for every disease. If you can detect it in its pre-disease form, there's lots you can do. In diabetes, it's also the case. Before your beta cell and your insulin wears out, before you're profoundly insulin resistant, that's the time to treat.
How
do we detect obesity in its form before it exists? Because do you know what I'm saying? I mean, I'm not trying to.
I agree. In fact, that's what let me show you this. I can just close with a couple of slides. We have little or no progress in diseases where we have no marker of early disease. So obesity prevention, I would like to be able to measure how many calories you're burning, what your fitness is, and how much muscle you have. If I could measure those in young people, and I can sort of measure a couple of those, I could probably predict who's on their path to obesity. Whether they're not burning enough calories, they're not fit, and they don't have enough muscle. And those people would say, here, you got to do this. You got to work on this. Or here's a medicine, which we don't have yet. But those was what medicines would target, one of these 3 things.
Wow.
Yeah.
So are you going to have these tests available for us soon?
Well, we do have a muscle mass test, just to close with that. This is a test that we published, me and my colleague, Bill Evans. And this muscle mass test is just from a urine test, and it correlates with a whole body MRI, which costs $3,000. And this test costs, $50, $100. So we did a study here in 1,300 old men. We looked at their muscle mass with this test, and we see as you get older, really old, 80, 90 years old, you'll have very low muscle. But before that, there's a lot of variability. 75-year-olds, some people have a lot of muscle, some don't. We found, this is a complicated slide, but very important because it tells you how important a measurement is. The people with the most muscle in old people, the least muscle had by far the worst rate of falling down, of becoming disabled, or of experiencing weakness. So sometimes 10 times, if you have less muscle versus more muscle, you can predict that they're 10 times more likely or 5 times more likely to be weak, to be hospitalized, or institutionalized because they're disabled, they can't move around, or to fall down and break their hip. And so this is, again, a test that we now use in old people to predict the risk of sarcopenia or frailty.
What do you consider old people? Because I feel like I'm almost one.
You might be, so might I, but I don't think it's actually, you don't act like one. So I don't think it's age. It's really things like someone who's older and has muscle mass is not that old, at least from the point of view of a lot of their biology.
Wow. The test that you have with the drop of urine, is that something that's going to be available to the public soon?
Well, it's available in a research test, and we've done it in thousands of people. And yeah, we're going to try to make it available to the public.
That is just fascinating.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Hellerstein, what's the real truth about weight loss?
Well, if I had to summarize it, I'd say the real truth is it's almost impossible to maintain long-term weight loss and health without some form of voluntary physical activity. Again, everybody talks about diet. It's so much easier to tell people what to eat than to actually eat less. But the one other thing, so telling people what to eat, in my experience, has not been a profound result because it doesn't necessarily make them eat less. But you can tell people to exercise. That is a proactive, volitional thing. I don't control my appetite. My appetite controls me. I can try to modulate it, but I do control my activity. And so I think if I were to focus public health, I would focus on activity, because even if you're overweight, if you're fit, you have a better outcome. Even if it doesn't work for obesity, which it might, it works for health. And it does help obesity because it burns more calories, means you're not as miserable eating less for the rest of your life as if you didn't exercise. It keeps you fit and it improves your muscle mass. These are three very good things that I would focus on.
I can't control my appetite, but I can control my activity. That is very well said.
Thank you. I believe in that. I mean, I believe in, it's frustrating to be told to do things that you can't control. Your autonomic nervous system is not really under your control, but your activity is.
Beautifully said. Thank you so much, Dr. Hellerstein.
Thank you. It's always fun.